The emergency doctors could not save the millionaire's wife who fell ill at the cruise ship. Minutes later, the cleaning lady ran to help, and everyone was paralyzed when they saw what she did. Before starting the video, tell me where you are watching this video and what time it is. The ocean stretched infinitely under a golden sunset, its tranquil waves caressing the hull of the majestic Voyager. A cruise liner renowned for its elegance, it gleamed like a floating palace against the backdrop of endless blue. Every detail of the ship radiated opulence. Crystal chandeliers glittered in the grand ballroom, plush carpets muffled footsteps, and tuxedo-clad servers weaved expertly through guests with trays of champagne flutes. The majestic Voyager catered to an elite clientele, promising not just a vacation but an experience. On this particular evening, the ship was abuzz with excitement. A formal gala marked the highlight of the voyage, and the dining hall was alive with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the gentle hum of a live string quartet. Tables adorned with pristine white linens and towering floral arrangements filled the hall. Guests dressed to the nines milled about, exchanging pleasantries and toasting to the good life. Each detail of the evening was curated to perfection, a celebration of luxury and excess that seemed to hold no room for mishaps. Near the center of the room, a group of servers worked seamlessly to present an elaborate menu. Exotic dishes were set before the guests, their scents mingling with the delicate aroma of roses. Conversation ebbed and flowed like a tide, occasionally punctuated by bursts of laughter. The mood was serene, nearly dreamlike, but beneath this facade of perfection, fate quietly threaded a darker narrative. Somewhere among the finely dressed crowd, an unassuming figure stood against the tide of indulgence, unnoticed, a humble cleaning lady named Ashley. But at this moment, her story was still folded into the background, waiting to emerge. For now, the spotlight rested on Emma and Jonathan St. Clair, whose arrival turned heads. Emma St. Clair glided into the room on Jonathan's arm, her emerald green gown shimmering under the chandeliers. With delicate diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement, she looked every bit the picture of elegance. Her honey blonde hair was swept into a sophisticated chignon, and her smile, though poised, seemed slightly strained. Jonathan, by contrast, was the epitome of confidence. His tailored tuxedo accentuated his athletic frame, and his neatly combed salt and pepper hair added a touch of distinguished charm. As he led Emma to their table, he greeted acquaintances with a handshake that lingered and a charm that seemed rehearsed. His every movement exuded control, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Darling, you've outdone yourself," Jonathan murmured to Emma, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. Emma offered a polite nod, her fingers tightening slightly around the clutch in her hand. To the onlookers they seemed the perfect couple, affluent, poised, and entirely at ease. But a closer look revealed cracks in the facade. Emma's gaze often wandered, flitting nervously across the room as though searching for something, or someone. Her polished demeanor faltered occasionally, betrayed by a subtle downward tug of her lips or the way her hand trembled when she reached for her glass. Jonathan, too, seemed distracted, his attention veering away from his wife whenever someone of influence approached. The guests at their table, a mix of socialites and business magnates, chattered away about their investments and upcoming ventures. Emma offered polite responses, but her voice lacked the enthusiasm that Jonathan projected so easily. His laughter boomed at the slightest jest, filling the air with a forced joviality that seemed to demand attention. As the evening progressed, Emma leaned closer to Jonathan. "Can we leave soon?" she whispered, her tone almost pleading. Jonathan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Emma, please," he said through clenched teeth, his smile never faltering for the benefit of the onlookers. "It's one evening. Don't ruin this." Emma sank back in her seat, her discomfort growing more palpable. Despite the extravagance surrounding her, she seemed out of place, like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, the motion small yet incessant. From the edge of the dining hall, Ashley the cleaning lady observed them. She had been discreetly wiping down a spill earlier and had caught the momentary exchange. Ashley wasn't one to eavesdrop, but something about Emma's demeanor, her vulnerability, her isolation, stirred a pang of empathy. Still, Ashley quickly averted her gaze and returned to her work, blending seamlessly into the background. As dessert was served and the quartet transitioned to a lively waltz, Emma forced herself to smile, her lips trembling as though under strain. A few guests commented on her beauty, and she responded with a practiced graciousness. Yet the light in her eyes seemed dimmer now, her spirit weighed down by an invisible burden. In this grand theater of wealth and refinement, Emma and Jonathan played their roles impeccably, but their performance was far from flawless. Beneath the surface, their story carried an undercurrent of tension, one that only the night would reveal. Emma's smile wavered as she reached for her champagne flute. Her fingers felt unervingly weak, the delicate glass slipping slightly in her grasp before she steadied it. She took a small sip, hoping the bubbly drink would calm her nerves, but an unsettling wave of nausea swept over her instead. She placed the glass down, blinking rapidly. A dull ache had begun to form at the base of her skull, radiating down her neck. It wasn't the first time she'd felt off lately, but tonight it was different, sharper, more persistent. The lively hum of conversation around her grew distant, replaced by the quickened thrum of her own heartbeat in her ears. "Emma!" A voice cut through her haze. It was Jonathan, his tone sharp and impatient. "You're pale. Are you unwell?" Emma shook her head weakly. "I don't know," she murmured, pressing a hand to her forehead. Her skin was clammy, her pulse erratic. She could feel her body rebelling against her, yet she was reluctant to draw attention to herself. The fear of ruining Jonathan's evening, or worse, incurring his displeasure, kept her silent. The guests at their table began to notice. "Are you all right, Mrs. St. Clair?" one of them asked, concern breaking through the veneer of idle conversation. A murmur of agreement followed as all eyes turned toward her. "I just need a moment," Emma managed, attempting to rise from her chair. But the instant she stood, her vision blurred, and the room spun violently. Her knees buckled, sending her crumpling to the floor. Gasps erupted around the table, followed by a flurry of movement. Jonathan was on his feet instantly, his hands gripping her shoulders as he tried to shake her awake. "Emma! Emma, can you hear me?" he barked, his voice laced with panic. The chatter in the room fell silent as heads turned toward the commotion. Guests rose from their seats, some craning their necks to get a better view while others whispered among themselves. The quartet's music faltered, then stopped altogether. A server rushed forward. "Should I call for the ship's medical team?" Jonathan nodded briskly. "Yes, immediately." He turned back to Emma, his expression shifting between worry and frustration. "Stay with me, Emma," he muttered under his breath, his mask of control slipping for the first time that evening. Moments later, the ship's medical team arrived, their white uniforms a stark contrast against the glittering backdrop of the ballroom. They worked swiftly, checking Emma's pulse, shining a light into her eyes, and asking rapid-fire questions. "What happened? Did she consume anything unusual?" one of them asked. Jonathan gestured vaguely toward the table. "She had the same as everyone else. Champagne, the appetizers. Nothing out of the ordinary." But as the minutes dragged on, the doctor's expressions darkened. Emma's breathing was shallow, her skin ghostly pale. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as unease spread among the guests. One of the medics stepped aside and whispered to his colleague, though his words carried just far enough to be overheard. "She's deteriorating fast. We might lose her before we reach the next port." The weight of his statement settled over the room like a thick fog, suffocating the murmurs into silence. For all the wealth and prestige gathered in this room, no one seemed able to help the millionaire's wife. The medics worked with frenzied precision, but their tools seemed woefully inadequate against the enigma of Emma's condition. A heart monitor beeped erratically as they placed an oxygen mask over her face. Her pulse was weak, her limbs limp, and her skin cold to the touch. The situation was dire, and the medics exchanged glances heavy with unspoken doubt. Jonathan hovered near them, his anxiety bubbling over. Why isn't she responding? Do something, he snapped, his voice cracking. His earlier composed demeanor was entirely stripped away, replaced by raw desperation. We're doing everything we can, sir, one medic replied firmly, though the strain in his voice was evident. We need more information. Did she mention feeling unwell before this evening? Jonathan faltered. She said she was tired. Maybe a little dizzy, but nothing serious. His hand raked through his hair as his gaze darted between Emma's still form and the gathered crowd. The once glamorous ballroom now felt stifling, its opulence tauntingly useless against the life-or-death struggle unfolding at its center. Around the room, whispers rippled like an undercurrent. Guests speculated in hushed tones, their concern mingled with morbid curiosity. Could it be the food? One man murmured to his companion. Maybe a pre-existing condition, another guessed. She didn't look well earlier, someone noted, almost accusingly. Amid the growing tension, the captain himself arrived, flanked by security personnel. He addressed the medics with quiet authority. Status. She's critical, one of the medics reported grimly. We've administered a saline drip and oxygen, but her vitals are unstable. We're out of our depth here, Captain. She needs a hospital. The captain frowned. Our nearest port is still hours away. Can she hold on until then? The medic hesitated. His silence more damning than any words could be. A heavy pall settled over the room, the grim reality sinking in. Time was running out for Emma. On the periphery of the crowd, Ashley lingered with a mop in her hand, her cleaning duties forgotten. She had been in the middle of wiping down a spill near the entrance when the commotion started. Now, her wide eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Ashley was no doctor, but she knew enough to recognize signs of poisoning. The way Emma's body had crumpled, the pallor of her skin, the erratic breathing, it reminded her of something she had seen before long ago. Memories of her grandmother treating similar symptoms with herbal remedies surfaced unbidden, sparking an idea so audacious it made her pulse race. Could she really help? The medics were trained professionals, equipped with tools and expertise far beyond her humble knowledge. Yet it was clear they were losing hope. Ashley hesitated, clutching the mop handle tightly. What if she made things worse? But what if she was right? Her gaze flicked back to Emma, whose chest rose and fell shallowly beneath the oxygen mask. The sight was a catalyst, dissolving her doubts. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation, not when someone's life hung in the balance. Taking a deep breath, Ashley stepped forward. Ashley's entrance into the unfolding crisis was almost imperceptible at first. She approached cautiously, weaving through the crowd of onlookers who had gathered at a safe distance, their expressions a mixture of concern and detachment. Dressed in her simple uniform, navy slacks and a collared shirt with the cruise line's logo, she seemed invisible among the sea of evening gowns and tailored suits. But her presence was about to change everything. She stopped a few paces from the medics, her heart hammering as she took in the scene. Emma lay motionless, her chest rising faintly under the oxygen mask. The lead medic was kneeling beside her, his face etched with frustration as he adjusted the four-line. Beside him, Jonathan was pacing frantically, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Ashley swallowed hard. Every logical part of her screamed to stay out of it, to remain a silent observer. After all, what could a cleaning lady possibly contribute to such a dire situation? Yet, the tug of her conscience was stronger. She couldn't ignore the signs she'd seen. Her grandmother's teachings, lessons imparted in a small, dimly lit kitchen surrounded by jars of dried herbs, rushed back to her with startling clarity. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice almost lost amid the murmurs of the crowd. No one heard her. She stepped closer. "Excuse me," she repeated, louder this time, her voice tinged with urgency. The medic glanced up briefly, his brow furrowing. "We're in the middle of a critical situation. Please step back." "I understand," Ashley said, her voice steady despite the nerves swirling in her chest. "But I think I can help." Jonathan turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you? What could you possibly do that they can't?" His tone was sharp, almost dismissive, but the underlying panic in his voice betrayed his desperation. Ashley hesitated, feeling the weight of every judgmental stare in the room. She took a deep breath. "My name's Ashley. I'm a cleaner on this ship, but I've seen symptoms like hers before. I think," she hesitated, then pushed forward. "I think she might have been poisoned." The medic paused, his expression flickering with both skepticism and curiosity. "Poisoned? What makes you think that?" Ashley gestured toward Emma. Her symptoms, the sudden collapse, the cold sweat, the shallow breathing, they match something I saw once back home. My grandmother treated someone with similar signs using a remedy for toxic ingestion. I can try to help, but we need to act quickly. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "This is absurd. You're not a doctor. How can you possibly?" The captain raised a hand, cutting him off. "Wait," he said, his voice calm but commanding. He turned to the medic. "Is it possible?" The medic hesitated. "Poisoning is a stretch, but it's not impossible given the symptoms. We've already exhausted our options here. If she has an idea." He trailed off, looking at Ashley. Ashley's heart pounded as every eye in the room turned to her. "I need a few things," she said quickly. "Some activated charcoal," and she paused, mentally cataloging the ship's supplies. "Please just trust me." "Get her what she needs," the captain ordered. Jonathan stared in disbelief, but for once, he didn't argue. Ashley felt the crushing weight of the moment settle over her, but she squared her shoulders. Emma's life was worth the risk. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as Ashley quickly gathered what she needed. The ship's medic handed her a small canister of activated charcoal, his skepticism evident. "This is all we have," he said, his voice low. "What do you plan to do with it?" Ashley didn't hesitate. "I need to create a slurry. It can absorb toxins in the stomach if she ingested something harmful," she explained. "It won't hurt her if I'm wrong, but if I'm right, it might save her life." She knelt beside Emma, her hands trembling as she mixed the charcoal powder with a bit of water in a small cup. Around her, whispers swirled through the crowd, disbelief and derision peppering their murmurs. "Is she serious?" someone muttered. "What kind of crews hire staff like this?" "Desperate measures, I suppose," came another voice, tinged with condescension. Ashley blocked them out, focusing solely on the task before her. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "When you have the chance to save a life, don't think, act." She gently removed the oxygen mask from Emma's face. "I need you to sit her up carefully," she said, addressing the medic. He hesitated for a moment, then complied, helping to lift Emma into a semi-reclined position. Ashley brought the mixture to Emma's lips. Jonathan loomed over her, his anger simmering just below the surface. "If you hurt her—" "I'm trying to help," Ashley interrupted firmly, her voice steady despite the enormity of the situation. "If you want her to live, let me work." She tilted the cup slightly, letting the liquid dribble into Emma's mouth. Some of it spilled, and for a moment it seemed futile. Then Emma coughed weakly, her body reacting to the bitter substance. Encouraged, Ashley continued, coaxing more of the mixture down. Minutes passed like hours. Every eye in the room was fixed on the scene, the collective disbelief slowly giving way to a flicker of hope. Ashley whispered soft reassurances under her breath, as much to herself as to Emma, as she worked to administer the makeshift antidote. Then it happened. Emma's breathing, which had been shallow and irregular, began to steady. Her complexion, pale and waxy just moments ago, showed the faintest hint of color. The crowd collectively held its breath as Emma's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. "She's stabilizing," the medic said, astonished. He quickly checked her pulse and vital signs. "It's still weak, but she's improving." Jonathan's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. What did you do?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. Ashley sat back on her heels, her chest rising and falling as relief swept through her. "I didn't cure her," she said quietly. "But I think I bought her time. Enough to get her to a hospital." The room erupted in a mixture of applause and astonished murmurs. For the first time that evening, Ashley felt seen, not as a cleaning lady, but as someone who had made a difference. Yet, as she glanced at Emma's fragile form, a nagging thought tugged at her. What had caused this in the first place? As the crowd began to disperse, reassured by the sight of Emma breathing more steadily, Ashley remained by her side. The medics prepared to transfer Emma to a more stable location on the ship until they could reach the next port. Jonathan lingered nearby, his sharp gaze following every movement, but his earlier aggression had melted into silence. Ashley, however, couldn't shake an unsettling feeling. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear but from the adrenaline that had carried her through the past moments. Something about the entire incident gnawed at her. She glanced toward the table where Emma and Jonathan had been seated. The remains of their dinner and glasses sat untouched, now bathed in the soft glow of the ballroom's dimmed lights. "Thank you for what you did," the captain said, interrupting her thoughts. He stood tall, his expression a mix of gratitude and curiosity. Most people wouldn't have had the courage to step forward. Ashley nodded but hesitated. "Captain," she began, keeping her voice low, "I don't think this was an accident." The captain raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I've seen poisoning cases before," she said cautiously. "The symptoms matched too closely." And she paused, her eyes darting to Jonathan, who stood a few feet away, speaking tersely with one of the medics. "Something doesn't feel right." The captain studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Do you have reason to suspect someone?" Ashley hesitated. She couldn't make accusations without proof, but her instincts told her to dig deeper. "Not yet," she admitted. "But I'd like to take a closer look, if that's okay." "Be discreet," the captain said, his tone serious. "We can't make baseless claims, but if there's something to uncover, I trust you'll find it." With his approval, Ashley set to work. She approached the dining table, trying to ignore the sidelong glances from the remaining guests. She picked up Emma's glass, noting the faint residue of lipstick on the rim. The champagne inside looked unremarkable, but Ashley's gut told her it was worth examining. She turned her attention to the plate of food Emma had barely touched. A half-eaten slice of bread sat atop the porcelain dish. Beside it was a butter knife, the blade glistening with a thin, oily sheen. Ashley leaned closer, her pulse quickening. It wasn't butter. Her thoughts raced. If there was poison, how had it been administered? And, more importantly, who would have done such a thing? Her eyes flicked to Jonathan, whose face was a mask of strained composure as he spoke to another guest. Ashley remembered how detached he'd seemed earlier in the evening, how his concern for Emma had only surfaced when others began to notice. A memory surfaced, the way his hand had lingered on Emma's shoulder during dinner, his grip firm, almost controlling. She clenched her fists. Was he responsible? So why? Emma's condition hadn't come from chance. It was deliberate, calculated. Someone had wanted her incapacitated, maybe even dead. Her decision was made. Whatever the risk, she would find out the truth. Ashley clutched the butter knife wrapped in a clean napkin as she made her way to the captain's quarters. Her mind raced with questions, each more troubling than the last. She knew she needed to tread carefully. Accusing someone of attempted poisoning, let alone someone as powerful as Jonathan St. Clair, required undeniable evidence. When she arrived, the captain stood with the head of ship security, a stout man with a no-nonsense demeanor. Ashley placed the napkin-wrapped knife and Emma's glass on the desk, her voice calm but urgent. "I found these at the St. Clair's table. There's an oily residue on the knife, and if it's what I think it is, we need to test it immediately." The captain picked up the knife cautiously, examining the sheen under the light. "If this is laced with something toxic, it could explain her sudden illness." The security officer nodded. We have a small lab on board for basic tests. I'll get this analyzed right away. Ashley shifted her weight, her nerves alight with anticipation. There's more, she said, her voice dropping. I think Jonathan might be involved. His behavior tonight, it doesn't sit right. He was distant during dinner, but the second Emma collapsed, he was too quick to deflect questions, too defensive. The captain's expression darkened. Those are serious accusations, Ashley. I know, she admitted. But if I'm wrong, what harm is there in questioning him? And if I'm right, she trailed off, the gravity of her words hanging in the air. The captain exchanged a glance with the security officer before nodding. Bring Mr. St. Clair to the conference room, he instructed. We'll ask him a few questions. Moments later, Jonathan entered the room. His sharp suit slightly disheveled and his jaw tight with tension. His eyes flicked to Ashley, narrowing with suspicion. What's this about, he demanded. Mr. St. Clair, the captain began, his tone neutral but firm. We found some concerning items at your table. We need to ask you a few questions about your wife's condition. Jonathan bristled. You're questioning me. I've been worried sick about my wife. And now you're insinuating I had something to do with this. His voice rose, and the security officer stepped forward. His presence a subtle warning. No one's making accusations yet, the captain said evenly. But we need clarity. Were you aware of any substances your wife might have been exposed to? Jonathan scoffed, crossing his arms. Of course not. This is ridiculous. Do you really think I'd harm my own wife? Ashley held her ground, her voice steady as she spoke. Jonathan, during dinner you seemed distant. You barely spoke to Emma, and when she got sick, you were quick to deflect questions. And this, she pointed to the knife and glass, was found at your table. If you didn't know about it, who did? Jonathan's face flushed, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, his anger gave way to something colder, more calculated. This is absurd, he said, his tone sharp. Do you have any proof? Or is this just the ramblings of someone looking for attention? The captain intervened. The lab results will tell us more. Until then, you're not to leave this ship. Jonathan glared at Ashley, his composure cracking. You have no idea what you're meddling in. Ashley met his gaze, unflinching. Maybe not, she replied. But I'll find out. The results from the ship's lab came back faster than expected. The security officer entered the conference room holding a printed report, his expression grim. He handed it to the captain, who scanned the document quickly before looking up at Jonathan. The knife was coated with traces of aconitine, the captain said. It's a highly toxic compound found in certain plants. Small doses can cause symptoms like nausea, dizziness, and cardiac arrest. The amount on this knife was more than enough to incapacitate or kill someone. Jonathan's face remained carefully neutral, but his clenched jaw and darting eyes betrayed him. So what? You're implying I had something to do with this? That's outrageous. We're implying, the captain said steadily, that whoever placed this at your table intended harm to Mrs. St. Clair. You were sitting next to her. Do you expect us to believe you had no idea? Jonathan's composure cracked. This is absurd. Emma's my wife. Why would I ever hurt her? He slammed his fist on the table, his voice trembling with what seemed like genuine indignation. But Ashley wasn't convinced. There was a brittle edge to his words, a desperation that didn't align with innocence. Ashley stepped forward, her tone calm but unyielding. Jonathan, Emma trusted you. She loved you. But tonight, when she needed you the most, you hesitated. You deflected. And now this, she gestured to the evidence, proves someone wanted her dead. If it wasn't you, then who? Jonathan's silence was deafening. The room felt charged, every breath weighted with expectation. Finally, he slumped into the nearest chair, his mask of arrogance slipping entirely. He rubbed his face with both hands before looking up, his expression hollow. Fine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You want the truth. Here it is. The room seemed to shrink as everyone leaned in, waiting. "I never wanted to hurt her," Jonathan began, his tone weary but laced with bitterness. "But Emma, she suffocated me. Everything had to be her way. Her image, her charities, her perfect little life. Do you know what it's like living in someone's shadow, being reduced to nothing more than Mr. Emma St. Clair?" He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted out. I wanted freedom. But divorce, that would have cost me everything. The prenup she forced me to sign left me with nothing. Nothing." Ashley felt a chill run down her spine as Jonathan's words took on a darker edge. "So what? You decided to kill her?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. Jonathan's eyes flicked to her, cold and unrepentant. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said. "The poison, just a little, was meant to make her sick, keep her bedridden. Long enough for me to convince her to change the will." But then he trailed off, his face contorting with frustration. It spiraled out of control. The room was silent, the weight of his confession settling over everyone like a lead blanket. The captain stood, his voice filled with quiet authority. "Jonathan St. Clair, you're under arrest for attempted murder. Security will detain you until we reach port." As the guards escorted him away, Jonathan cast one last look at Ashley, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and defeat. "You should have stayed in your lane," he muttered. Ashley held her ground, her expression unyielding. Someone had to step up. Emma stirred awake in a quiet medical suite, the rhythmic hum of the ship's machinery filling the space. Her body felt weak, her limbs heavy, and her throat dry. Blinking slowly, she turned her head to see Ashley sitting by her side, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Hey," Ashley said softly, leaning forward. "You're awake." Emma's brow furrowed as she tried to piece together the fragmented memories of the evening. "What happened?" she rasped, her voice barely audible. Ashley hesitated, glancing at the nearby medic for confirmation. He gave a small nod, signaling it was safe to share the truth. "You got really sick during dinner," Ashley began carefully. "The doctors struggled to figure out what was wrong, but it turned out to be poisoning." Emma's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "Poisoning?" Her voice broke on the word, and her hand instinctively moved to her chest. "But how? Who would?" Ashley reached out and gently placed a hand on hers. "You're safe now," she said firmly. "But there's more. It was Jonathan." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Emma's breath hitched, her mind reeling. "Jonathan? Well, that can't be true. He couldn't." Ashley's grip tightened slightly, anchoring Emma as the truth settled in. "I'm so sorry, Emma," he confessed. "He admitted to putting something in your food. He said it wasn't meant to kill you, but he was trying to manipulate you. For money." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, spilling over as the enormity of the betrayal crashed over her. She shook her head, her voice cracking. "I gave him everything. My love, my trust, my life. How could he do this to me?" Ashley stayed silent, letting Emma process the devastation. After a moment, Emma's tears turned into quiet sobs, her body trembling with the effort of holding herself together. Ashley moved closer, pulling a chair to the bedside and clasping Emma's hand firmly in her own. "You didn't deserve this," Ashley said gently, her voice steady and warm. "None of this is your fault. And you're stronger than this moment. I've seen it in you." Emma looked at her through tear-streaked eyes. "You barely know me." Ashley smiled faintly. "I know enough. I know you fought through tonight. I know you're still here. And that's what matters." The two women sat in silence for a while, the connection between them deepening as Emma slowly calmed. Her breathing steadied, and though her heart still ached, a small ember of resolve began to spark within her. "Where is he now?" Emma finally asked, her voice stronger. "Security has him in custody," Ashley replied. "The captain's making sure he'll be turned over to the authorities as soon as we dock." Emma nodded, her jaw tightening. "But he doesn't get to walk away from this." For the first time in hours, Emma felt a flicker of control returning. Her path to recovery, physical, emotional, and spiritual, would be long, but she wasn't entirely alone. And as she glanced at Ashley, she realized that sometimes help came from the most unexpected places. The days that followed were a whirlwind of healing and reflection for Emma. Confined to the medical suite as the ship continued its voyage, she spent hours sifting through the fragments of her life that now felt like a lie. Each memory of Jonathan, his charming smiles, his thoughtful gestures, the life they'd built together, was tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. But she wasn't alone. Ashley visited her regularly, often bringing tea or small comforts from the ship's kitchen. At first, Emma struggled to accept the presence of the woman who had saved her life. It wasn't pride. Emma had always valued those who worked hard, regardless of their position, but rather the dissonance of being cared for by someone she barely knew. Yet, as the hours turned into days, she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. "You know," Emma said one afternoon, her voice soft as she stared out the porthole at the endless ocean, "I used to think Jonathan and I were perfect together. But now, looking back, there were signs. Little things I ignored. Times he dismissed me, made me feel small. I told myself it was normal, that I was just imagining it." Ashley, seated beside her with a cup of tea, nodded thoughtfully. "It's easy to overlook things when you care about someone. You want to see the best in them." Emma turned to her, her eyes searching Ashley's face. "How did you know? That it wasn't just an illness, I mean. How did you figure it out?" Ashley hesitated, then smiled faintly. "My grandmother. She was a healer back home, taught me everything she knew about plants and remedies. I've seen poisoning before. When I saw you collapse and noticed the signs, I just couldn't stand by." Emma studied her for a moment, her expression softening. "You didn't have to step in. You could have stayed out of it, let the doctors handle things. But you didn't." Ashley shrugged, though there was a quiet strength in her gaze. "I guess I've seen enough people walk away when they could have helped. I didn't want to be one of them." The words resonated deeply with Emma. She had spent so much of her life surrounded by wealth and privilege, yet she couldn't remember the last time someone had acted out of pure selflessness for her. It was humbling and inspiring. As their conversations deepened, Emma began to open up about her life, her passions, and the regrets she had kept buried. Ashley listened without judgment, offering quiet support and the occasional wry comment that made Emma laugh despite herself. In return, Emma found herself drawn to Ashley's resilience and resourcefulness. They were from vastly different worlds, yet their shared experience had forged a bond that felt unshakable. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and pink over the horizon, Emma turned to Ashley with a new determination in her eyes. "You know," she said, her voice steady, "I don't want this to define me. What Jonathan did, what happened on this ship, it can't be the end of my story." Ashley nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It doesn't have to be. You get to decide what happens next." And in that moment, Emma realized she wasn't just recovering, she was transforming. With Ashley by her side, she was beginning to see the possibility of a life rebuilt, one that wasn't defined by betrayal but by strength and purpose. The majestic Voyager docked at its next port, and Emma, now physically stronger but still emotionally raw, stood at the railing of her private cabin, watching the bustling harbor below. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her, but instead of feeling crushed, she felt an ember of determination begin to burn. Ashley's knock on the cabin door broke her reverie. "Come in," Emma called, turning to see her unlikely savior enter, holding a small notebook and a hesitant smile. "I thought you might want to brainstorm," Ashley said, gesturing to the notebook. "You've been talking about turning this nightmare into something meaningful." Emma gestured for her to sit, a faint smile breaking through her pensive expression. "You read my mind," she said. "I've been thinking a lot about it. Jonathan tried to take everything from me, but what he didn't realize is that I still have the most important thing: control over what comes next." Ashley nodded, her expression encouraging. "So, what's the plan?" Emma leaned forward, her eyes alight with a new sense of purpose. I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did. Trapped, betrayed, powerless. There are so many women out there who don't have the resources I do. Women who feel stuck in toxic relationships or who face hardships with no support. I want to change that. Ashley's brow furrowed thoughtfully. That's a big goal, she said. But it's a good one. What are you thinking? A foundation. Yes, Emma said, her excitement building. A foundation to support women in abusive or controlling relationships. We could offer financial assistance, legal aid, and emotional support. And not just that, prevention too. Education, empowerment programs, anything to help them reclaim their lives. Ashley nodded slowly, her expression serious. That's incredible, Emma. But you don't just need resources, you need people who've been through it. People who understand. Emma's smile widened. That's why I need you. Ashley froze, her eyes widening. Me. What could I possibly bring to the table? Everything, Emma said simply. Your courage, your insight, your practical wisdom. You saw what no one else did. You stepped in when everyone else stood back. That's exactly the kind of spirit this foundation needs. Ashley stared at her, speechless for a moment. Then she shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. You're serious, aren't you? Completely, Emma replied. This can't just be about me. It has to be about all of us. Women who've been overlooked, underestimated, or mistreated. You saw me at my weakest and gave me strength. Together, we can do that for so many others. Ashley's smile softened into something genuine. All right, she said, extending her hand. I'm in. Emma clasped her hand firmly, and for the first time in days, she felt a weight lift from her chest. They spent the next hours outlining their vision, sketching plans for the foundation. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, they had filled pages with ideas, dreams of hope, resilience, and change. Their bond, forged in the crucible of adversity, had become the cornerstone of something far greater. Together, they would turn Emma's pain into power and ensure that no woman ever had to face the darkness alone. The courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators eager to witness the high-profile trial of Jonathan St. Clair. Emma sat near the front, her posture regal, her expression serene but firm. Beside her was Ashley, a quiet but steady presence, lending her strength. This moment wasn't just about justice, it was about closure. Jonathan sat at the defendant's table. His once impeccable appearance diminished. The charm he had wielded so effectively in social circles was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a hardened, resentful demeanor. His defense team had tried to argue that the poisoning was a mistake, an ill-advised act of desperation. But Jonathan's own confession, corroborated by Ashley's discoveries and forensic evidence, had sealed his fate. As the judge read the guilty verdict aloud, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jonathan was convicted of attempted murder, tampering with evidence, and other related charges. He would spend the next several decades in prison, stripped of the wealth and status he had once used as a shield. Emma exhaled slowly, the weight of months of anxiety finally lifting from her chest. There was no joy in Jonathan's downfall, only a sense of resolution. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for the part of her that had been silenced and dismissed for too long. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions and snapping photos. Emma stepped up to the microphones, her expression calm but resolute. Today isn't about revenge, she began, her voice steady. It's about accountability. I trusted someone who betrayed me in the worst way. But I survived, and I'm stronger for it. My focus now is on moving forward, not just for myself, but for others who faced similar battles. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. That's why I'm proud to announce the launch of the Safe Haven Foundation. It's an initiative dedicated to supporting women in crisis, providing them with the resources, guidance, and strength they need to rebuild their lives. No one should have to face hardship alone. The crowd erupted into a flurry of questions, but Emma stepped away, flanked by Ashley and her legal team. As they climbed into the waiting car, Emma turned to Ashley, her smile faint but genuine. "We did it." Ashley grinned. "You did it." "I just pushed a little." Emma shook her head. "Oh, we did it. And this is just the beginning." The Safe Haven Foundation launched 6 months after Emma's recovery, headquartered in a sleek building in the heart of New York City. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a modest affair, attended by close friends, supporters, and a few reporters who had followed Emma's journey since the trial. The foundation's logo, a delicate phoenix rising from flames, was unveiled, symbolizing resilience and rebirth. Inside, the energy was palpable. Volunteers staffed phones, ready to offer advice and resources to women in crisis. Rooms once used for corporate offices had been transformed into warm, welcoming spaces. A legal aid center, a counseling hub, and a job training program. Emma had spared no expense, ensuring that every detail aligned with the Foundation's mission to provide safety, empowerment, and hope. On the Foundation's opening day, Emma and Ashley hosted a small press conference to outline their vision. "Safe Haven is more than just an organization," Emma said, addressing the crowd. "It's a lifeline. When I was at my lowest, I realized how lucky I was to have resources. And even then, I felt completely lost. This foundation exists to make sure no woman ever feels like she's fighting alone." Ashley stood by her side, offering a heartfelt perspective. "I come from a world where resources are limited, and opportunities can feel impossible. I've seen firsthand how a single act of kindness can change someone's life. Safe Haven is about multiplying those acts 1,000 times over." As the press conference concluded, Emma found herself approached by a young woman named Clara. Her voice was hesitant but earnest as she introduced herself. "I read about what you went through," Clara said. "I've been in a similar situation. I didn't know where to turn, but when I heard about Safe Haven, I thought maybe this was a sign." Emma took her hands gently, her eyes filling with warmth. "You're in the right place," she said. "We're here to help." Clara's story became one of the Foundation's first successes. With Safe Haven's support, she found shelter, received legal representation to escape her abusive marriage, and started a new job through their career placement program. Months later, she stood before a room full of donors, her voice steady as she shared her journey. "Safe Haven didn't just save my life. It gave me a new one." Stories like Clara's began to spread, bolstering the Foundation's reputation and attracting more resources. Donations poured in, allowing the Foundation to expand its reach. Branches opened in other cities, each modeled after the original Safe Haven, and the initiative began to draw national attention. Emma and Ashley worked tirelessly, their bond strengthening with each challenge they overcame. Late one evening, after reviewing a proposal for another branch location, they sat together in the Foundation's office, sipping tea and reflecting on how far they'd come. "Did you ever think this is where we'd end up?" Emma asked, her voice tinged with awe. Ashley laughed softly. "Not in a million years. But I wouldn't change a thing." Emma smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "You know, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." And she was. Together, Emma and Ashley had turned pain into purpose, creating something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. 1 year after its launch, the Safe Haven Foundation had grown into a nationwide movement. Testimonials poured in from women who had found sanctuary and hope through its programs. Videos of tearful thank yous from survivors played on the Foundation's website, their gratitude a testament to the profound impact of Emma and Ashley's vision. At the annual gala, the Foundation's largest fundraiser yet, the room buzzed with energy and optimism. Attendees ranged from philanthropists to former Safe Haven beneficiaries, all gathered to celebrate the organization's achievements. The ballroom was elegantly decorated, but its atmosphere felt different from the grandeur of Emma's past life. This wasn't about status or wealth. It was about purpose. Emma stood at the podium, the applause fading as she began to speak. "A little over a year ago," she said, her voice steady, "I was at my lowest point. I felt broken, betrayed, and unsure of who I was without the life I thought I'd built. But in the darkness, I found a light, an unlikely friend who reminded me of my strength and helped me find my way." She gestured toward Ashley, who sat near the stage, beaming. That friend not only saved my life but helped me realize the power of connection, courage, and compassion. Safe Haven was born out of that realization, that together we can overcome even the greatest challenges. Emma paused, her gaze sweeping the room. Today we've helped over 5,000 women. We've provided shelter, legal aid, counseling, and, most importantly, a community. But this is just the beginning. With your support, we can expand our reach and ensure that every woman who needs help can find it. The crowd erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Emma stepped down from the podium and joined Ashley at the table, her heart full. "You've gotten really good at this," Ashley teased, nudging her gently. Emma laughed. "You think so?" "Absolutely," Ashley replied, her smile warm. "But don't think I'm letting you off the hook. We've got a lot more work to do." Later that evening, Emma and Ashley stood on the balcony overlooking the city skyline, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the warmth of the ballroom. They sipped champagne, a quiet moment amidst the whirlwind of the gala. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Emma asked, her voice soft. Ashley tilted her head thoughtfully. "I think I can. You've always had it in you, this fire, this drive. I just gave it a nudge." Emma shook her head. "You gave me more than that, Ashley. You reminded me what it means to fight for something real. To believe in people, even when it feels impossible." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling below them. Emma turned to Ashley, her smile radiant. "You know, we're a pretty good team." Ashley grinned. "The best." As the night stretched on, the two women reflected not just on how much had changed but on how much they'd grown. Emma had found her strength, Ashley her purpose, and together, they had created something extraordinary. Safe Haven wasn't just an organization. It was a testament to the power of resilience, friendship, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, there is always light.